This live stream brought to you by the Excelsior Citizen and these generous sponsors. The Simmons Sales Team, your hometown realtors. Our Excelsior Springs Hospital, where better care is right in your backyard. Find out how you can advertise with Excelsior Springs' #1 community resource. Visit ExcelsiorCitizen.com today.
Back in the 70s when they used to make a country. Yeah. Exactly. That's what I said. They're probably from the 70s. They've been in somebody's basement for years.
Start.
Yeah.
All right. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to see a good turnout tonight. This is an endeavor that we started probably a year ago. We were successful. Kind of started, let me say, that Doug Ritchie raised the issue of let's address the flooding in downtown and arranged a conversation with Department of Natural Resources to kind of chase the funding that would be coming down the pike due to ARPA. And it wasn't really possible because we needed to have a shovel-ready project, which we did not have. So we needed to back up a little bit and start with the plan. So we were actually very successful in asking Clay County to fund this plan for us. And we've been working at it for the last year. So I'm going to introduce Vireo and GBA, George Butler Associates, who are here and been working on this plan with us. And we're very excited about the things we've learned along the way and want to present what we've learned. And, you know, we are in a floodplain, so we are not changing the fact that we're in a floodplain. But there is things that we can do to alleviate some of the flooding impacts, and that's really what we're focused on. So thank you for coming, and we'll let these guys take this away.
Molly. Good evening. It is nice to see a room full of people. I am Lori Brown with Vireo. I'm the conservation ecologist for our firm. I have with me Becca Pruitt. She is a landscape designer. I also have Jessica Lee. She's our business manager. And Scott Schulte, who is our stormwater/environmental planner. We also have with us George Butler Associates, GBA. We have Beth Fry and Julie Havlin. Now, Vireo's been handling sort of the environmental side of this, looking at the ecological components to it and figuring out landscape features, things like that. And GBA has been doing the hydrology and hydraulics and all the modeling and figuring out what we can actually put in places, what works, what doesn't work, and also helping us to figure out what we're going to get out of this by doing these various projects. The way this is set up tonight is we'll go through the presentation, talk you through kind of all of the pieces that have gone into this, and then we want to have this as an open house. We've got boards that are a good portion of the presentation tonight that we will be at, and we would like you to take time after we finish the presentation to talk to us, ask us questions, provide comments. You'll see that on the boards there are places to write things down. There also are comment sheets back on the back table there, so if you don't feel comfortable writing something on the board or necessarily just speaking it out, or even just have a thought, afterwards, go ahead and write it down on the papers that are in the back and then make certain that we get those later on. If you happen to take one with you and get a thought later that you want to send it, you can always send it to Molly and she will make certain that we get it. All of this is all going to be basically encapsulated into a watershed report that we're doing. We've been producing that as we've gone along. We will include not only the study part of looking at the engineering and the ecological side, we're also including this portion of it, the public side of it, making certain that the comments that you guys provide us are in that document, so they're kind of in there in perpetuity, so that the city knows these are the things we're hearing, this is what people are asking, this is what they're thinking, so that that's captured, and that helps to refine these projects as they go along. So, in today's meeting, we're going to talk to you about why we're here. We're going to give you a little bit about what we've heard. We're going to talk about what we've learned through both the modeling, the engineering modeling, as well as the ecological field work that we've done. We will go through the recommended alternatives. We're going to talk to you about what happens next with this project. And then we're going to open this up to the open house where you can have the discussions with us one-on-one. We have city staff here as well, so we will have both ourselves and the city staff. Chad Birdsong is here, Melinda's in the back over there, and Molly's here, so don't hesitate to ask us questions about the project. And Keith with the City of Crystal Lakes is in the back as well. So what brought us here? As Molly mentioned, you're in a floodplain. You have issues with flooding. There's been chronic flooding downtown. So it's been a matter of trying to figure out, okay, what can be done, what's feasible, what's effective. Are we actually able to truly get rid of flooding or not? Well, we've been up front the whole time. No, we cannot eliminate all flooding in downtown Excelsior unless we were to move the whole community out of the floodplain. But we can help you out, and we'll talk about that as we go through. Stream bank instability, that's another issue that you have when you have this up and down with your flooding. You have stream banks that give way, and then you end up with all this sediment that ends up somewhere downstream. May or may not be a problem if it stays in the creek, but sometimes it ends up in your building foundations or on your streets, things like that, and that's an issue. Inadequate bridge and culvert openings. Now, obviously, the city's replacing bridges as they can get them funding to do so, but you still have some places that actually act as sort of dams. They hold back some of that water. That can be a problem if it backs it up onto another street or into a building. Highly constrained floodplains. When you have an older community like this is not unusual. You guys, the town was being built without the thought of what would happen hundreds of years down the road when we had so much more development contributing water into the watershed and into the floodplain. And we can't just pick up buildings and move them. So we got to figure out what can we do that helps alleviate those flooding issues. And then overland flooding from adjacent hillsides. This is a very hilly area, so we not only have the water that's ending up in the creek, but we have water that's coming down the hills like what you get north of town, coming right into the Broadway street area here. That's all the water coming off the hill adjacent to this. So trying to deal with that as well. And then all of these conditions that are related to flooding obviously threaten life, threaten property, and they also threaten infrastructure, whether it's streets or sewers or other things that the city puts in. If there's water that's not being contained within them, it can cause problems. So what do we do about that, and what has the city been doing? The city back in '93, when you had the major flood, actually went out and bought several properties. You'll see the properties on the maps. All the light purple shading on all the various maps is the city-owned properties. A lot of those are flood buyouts. Creation of the Fishing River Linear Trail. If we can pull things back away from our creeks, give them some room to move, give them some room to flood, we can help not have that flooding somewhere else. We also can, they're not flooding all the time, so why not make them into a park so they're multi-use? So that's what the Fishing River Linear Trail does. Bridge improvements and replacements as the city can get the money, and as they're working through studying, figuring out which bridges take priority, they get those bridges and various culverts taken care of. Then our watershed study. So the goal behind this was to basically identify a comprehensive program that would address trying to reduce flooding within the downtown Excelsior Springs area. We want to look at reducing the frequency as well as the severity of flooding. And you'll hear as we go through how our projects can hopefully help to do that. We want to protect downtown properties, the businesses, and the infrastructure. So we're trying to make it better for everybody that has a vested interest here in downtown Excelsior. And then we want to protect and enhance the community's ecological health. We all know that while we can build stuff and protect stuff, nature has been doing a lot of this for a long time. Nature knows what she's doing. We can actually use both our engineering solutions as well as integrating nature to help us solve some of these problems. And it makes for a much better community. You guys have a wonderful trail system with the parks that you have along the creeks. We want to take advantage of that. And you'll hear a little bit more about one of the projects that's going to do that right off the bat. So what has been our planning process? We basically started this off with looking at what the existing conditions are. That was going out to all the various sites where we've seen that there are issues with flooding. It's also looking at the creeks. Both Beck and I were out in most of the creeks here within the community, and Beth and Julie spent quite a bit of time looking at bridges and culverts and things that might be causing constrictions or other things that were influencing flow of water. So we pull all that together, but we also took the time to make certain that we were talking to the community. Some of you, I believe we met at the Watershed back in June, where we had tables out and we were talking to people about what the study would entail. And we also had another community meeting back in September where we had started to talk about our potential solutions. We looked at the whole 2 watersheds, and this is the Dry Fork, which is your north-south watershed, and the East Fork, which is your kind of east-south. It kind of does a little bit of north, south, east, and west, but the one that comes in from the east side of the city. So we looked at those 2 watersheds, and we're looking at all kinds of options. You'll see a map here shortly that'll show you that. But we know we can't put everything everywhere. It gets too costly, it doesn't make sense, it's not effective. So we pulled those potential solutions into more refined preliminary alternatives, which we'll get into. And then we've been working all of that into an initial and a final draft report that'll come out for the city. It'll have all the details in it. We will be doing basically a public version, which is an executive summary of that, because the city wants all the details, but we want you all to understand it, and you don't need all the tables that go into that to understand it. So we'll have 2 slightly different versions, but they're all the same information. So what have we heard? This is from the community workshop we had at the community center in September. Basically, we were talking about things like wet detention, having areas that would have some wetland type features to them. Dry detention, those are areas that are going to hold water during wet situations during storm events, but could potentially be useful when they're dry, which is oftentimes more often the case. Stream bank stabilization, making certain that our stream banks aren't causing some of our problems here. Riparian buffers, again, that's what the linear parks are doing. They're actually buffering your stream and letting your stream function better. And that includes not only open space, but adding in trees and other vegetation that can help to filter as well as hold back water and also help to keep those banks stable. Managing stream flows is always important. So figuring out how we can deal with making certain that the water goes where it needs to go and not where it shouldn't be going. And then rain gardens. One of the things is the cities here is looking at options that they can do and that they're looking for funding to do, but each and every one of you can actually contribute to what's happening here on your own property. You may not be at the bottom of the hill having the problem. You may be at the top, but you're still part of the solution. And things like putting in rain gardens and rain barrels are things that help you to add landscape amenities. They're very good for wildlife, and they help deal with the water runoff on your own property. So I believe, Molly, hasn't the city started the rain barrel program?
We have, we have some marketing materials on our website about how to do a rain barrel program.
Okay. And if you want to learn more, the Mid-America Regional Council has information on both the rain barrels and rain gardens. Yes. So those are things and there's a lot of information out there. So if you want to learn more, the website is actually a very good place to go to learn more about it. But those are things that you as an individual can do that actually do contribute, especially the more the community gets involved, the more it actually does help. So what we heard from the last meeting, basically these are a summary of the general comments. People wanted us to capture water wherever possible. So not only at the residential scale, but at the city scale. Try and pull as much of it as we can out of the system to let it slowly go back into the system when the system can handle it. Management of water flow and detention with visually appealing plantings. We want the areas that are holding the water to not just look like muddy holes. We want them to be able to have vegetation that's appropriate to how much water's in them, or how much water isn't in them, and basically have something that adds value to our community, doesn't just look like a sore spot that we've forgotten about. Solutions should be visually appealing and cost effective. Obviously, cost is always a concern, making certain that we're putting things in that add value to the community and that are affordable. And then solutions should include additional benefits such as recreation for the community. We're going to talk about one of our sites tonight that it will have lots of recreational amenities to it as part of the solution. And coordinate with partners. when you're talking about dealing with stormwater, you're talking about small scale to large scale, short term to long term. In order to reach that long term goal, which we'll talk about one of the bigger projects, which is a long term goal, we have to have partners. Now, you guys are all partners from the standpoint you're part of this community. But if we're looking for funding and ways to get things done, we have to reach outside of our community and get to other agencies or other funding sources that can actually help us to implement these projects. You'll hear more about what they're potentially going to cost, and we can tell you that we've already started having conversations in the case of one of the projects with federal agencies in order to figure out how we can move forward with a much bigger project. So we're looking at partners that can actually help us to implement stuff that is, we're talking 10 to 15 years down the road to get some of these in. And so this is kind of the overall arching goal that we have been talking about through this whole project, and that's what's going to happen with flooding. And we're saying that flooding will be less frequent, it will be less extensive, it will be less damaging, and less dangerous. That's our goal with these projects. So I mentioned earlier that we started with a big picture. Well, these are the two watersheds. The Dry Fork is your north-south, and Crystal Lakes is on East Fork, so it's your east-west. And we had all kinds of thoughts based on just putting engineers and ecologists and landscape designers together. We had lots of thoughts for lots of opportunities. It's great, but they're not cost-effective when you start spreading them out too far. So we started looking at more refined project areas. We have Project Area 1, which is on the Dry Fork. It's this little spot right here. And it actually is a greenway. So it'll be very much like your little park that you have over here along East Fork. We also are looking at improving Main Street. Main Street has a low water crossing. That low water crossing doesn't work very well. So we're looking at ways to make that low water crossing more effective and function better and actually help with our stormwater management. Site number 2 is Tributary 1. This is actually just outside the city limits of Excelsior Springs, and it's a great opportunity along a main tributary to Dry Fork that actually contributes quite a bit of water. Site number 3 is South Street. It's the old auto dealer.
United Auto.
And it's right next to the Albany Hotel. You'll hear more about each of these projects from both Beth and Becca, sorry. Sure, I am. Site number 4 is Crystal Lakes. That's our big partner right here. And then our 5th site was the Mercer property. Now, as we went through and looked at these, all of these sites looked very viable, but we will tell you right off the bat that Site 5, the Mercer property, basically did not make sense. We couldn't store enough water on that site and do anything to really help, so we actually pulled that site out of the rest of our evaluation. The other 4 sites we've continued to evaluate. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth and Becca.
Well, actually, I'm just going to talk about this side real quick, and then I'm going to let Julie do a little bit of talking today. So that's kind of new for me. What we did here, what we're talking about here is kind of, so from an engineering perspective, we built this really big model to kind of get to know the existing conditions of the watershed. But we actually had to go out into the creeks as well to kind of understand the existing conditions. And we went out and visualized and made some measurements on all these bridges and culverts out there to kind of, like Lori was mentioning before, just kind of understand better what constraints might be, but to also make sure we were representing them all in our analysis. And then we really got to know Crystal Lakes really well because we saw it as an obvious opportunity, but it doesn't make sense to really get into just the conceptual piece without really knowing what's going on out there. So this is just a few pictures of some of the additional survey we did out there. We even got our boat out there to take some measurements below the water, which I'll actually get into a little bit more. But using all this field work and, like all the conversations we had, we were able to start analyzing the existing conditions and the solutions for each of these sites. So, Julie, do you want to talk about Site 1? Sure. Start with the existing on that one.
Yeah, so this was kind of the first area that we thought would be a great place to create some more detention and create that greenway space that we were talking about earlier. So obviously this is Main Street, and the low water crossing there, I'm sure you're all familiar with, does not work very well. It is very undersized and not really designed to pass any storm through there. So that's kind of what the existing conditions looks like, and it causes a lot of safety hazards with road closures and flooding properties.
So we talked about design ideas in our previous conversations, and so I'm going to pull those design ideas that we've talked about, and we're going to refine them a little bit on each site. So for site 1, you can see kind of a riparian buffer image. This is really talking about taking the stream corridor itself and how do we extend it further so that we're keeping those stream banks stable and making sure that they're staying put while offering a community amenity. And you guys have a huge, great example of a greenway already with East Fork.
So as far as our modeling efforts went, the main design parameter we were focusing on was how do we upgrade that low water crossing into something that's usable, and that's kind of led us to raising Main Street, raising the profile of the road to allow space for a bigger culvert through there. So these gray areas you see on here are, they're going to be mostly dry detention basins. And kind of a common concept that we kept coming back to was how can we reconnect the stream with its natural floodplain. We know it wants to come out of its banks anyway, so the longer we can keep it there and not send it all downstream at once, the better the effects will be. So the culvert replacement we did, it's higher up, but it still passes through the lower events.
So she talked about the engineering, but taking it just a step further of what those are actually going to look like. And our legend's pretty little, so I'll go through each of the different types. But those yellow colored spaces, those are going to be things like grasses and sedges, so that when that's full of water, those are going to be able to maintain and keep growing and stay stable until that water is able to dissipate. That light green that you'll see kind of centrally there, that's more of our open lawn space. This is more usable. This is something that people are going out tossing a frisbee on. This is something that people are going out into that basin in that dry time. And then we also have the dark green section. We understand that a lot of this area is already really forested. And as we're going through making improvements, we want to bring those trees back and have that stability as well. And so we've made sure to add those in along the way. And you can see kind of some examples. This is one of the bigger opportunities that we have, and so we really wanted to fold in what are community amenities that people want to see in this space. So we have the main loop trail, which is something we've heard is desirable and that people want to participate in, but also along here at the bottom, outside of the floodplain, we want to have a community space. So we have some example pictures at the top, whether that be some fields, whether that be a place to hold community events. But really offering that gathering space in this area, as well as our forested and our herbaceous basins examples. I should say, before we move on, this project has already gone out with a grant and is already funded. So you can see it across the top there. But we're very excited that this project is moving forward. So all of the things that we ask you to write on the board, we mean it. We really want to know what we want to put in that bottom space so that we can start putting those ideas to work.
And we will say that the funding actually goes towards construction of the greenway, not towards the public amenities in that lower space, but we want to give the Parks Department an idea of what they could look at to be able to put in that space.
So the next area that we looked at was Tributary 1, that we were calling it. It's a pretty major tributary that flows into Dry Fork. It accounts for about 40% of the total flows of the Dry Fork reach. And we were excited about this because it is one single parcel, so it provides us an exciting opportunity to work together with the community a little bit to come up with a nice solution for everyone. As you can see, the creek is actually really healthy out here. It looks really nice. Yeah, so it's kind of a nice area to expand a little bit.
So in our design ideas here, of course this is, one single property owner, so we're really looking to maximize their space and making sure that we're putting back natural spaces that were like what are there previously. And so we have two different detention examples. One, whether that be an herbaceous basin on the left or putting it back as a forested space that could have that water level rise and fall while still maintaining its structure.
So our proposed solutions here are mostly focusing on that dry detention like we were talking about. Again, grading out those areas to kind of reconnect with the floodplain a little bit, letting the water spread out. And so these are primarily dry detention, but during larger events it will be inundated. But that earthen dam there that we have pictured, it's going to be able to pass regular flows, so it's not going to have any negative upstream effects, and it'll keep that creek healthy like it wants to be.
So just like we showed before, those colors are going to be the same across the board. So those on the left of this site are going to be more of those grasses and sedges. So as more water is in that space, they're able to take that flow. And we'll keep the forested sections up above a little bit. And so you can see in the images, the dry condition, the wet condition, basically all we're talking about is when there's a big rain event, that water will rise, those trees will hang out, stay in a little bit of water for a while, and as that water is able to either rejoin the creek or is absorbed into the ground, that water will fall and it'll just be a dry basin, as Julie has mentioned previously. And we are working with that landowner to kind of accommodate the desires for that space to make sure that what we're putting back is up to snuff for what they're looking for.
Okay, this site is downtown on South Street. Existing conditions, you can kind of see a lot with the floodplain mapping. The banks are hard armored and high. So, that floodplain connectivity we're talking about, we're not getting a lot of that. And instead you can kind of see where the flood comes out and crosses over versus moving around the bend. It's also a pretty significant meander in the creek, and we're seeing that there's been some pretty good erosion on that outer bend, on that north bank. There's been some countermeasures taken. So erosion's a concern when you, and we experience it a lot when the creek is confined within its banks. So here we're looking at some more of that overbank grading. We're really big into floodplain connectivity, letting the more frequent flood events get out into its banks and spread out. So here there's a great opportunity for that to happen. An inner bend of a creek is like perfect. That's where you want to cut it down and let the creek flood out. It will alleviate some of those stresses that are on that outer bank. So, it will kind of help with that erosion protection. Of course, you still need some hard armoring in a case like this. But yeah, we're looking at basically that gray blob there. That's where we're looking at cutting down the bank, letting the creek flood out of its banks. And then maybe taking out that, what we're calling a gabion wall on that north bank and putting in a retaining wall to hold that up a little bit better. Yeah, so just by cutting down that bank quite a bit, we were able to really see some flow attenuation and some holding back of that water, which is what we're looking for.
We zoomed in a little bit, so we can't see as much of the outside flooding, but we're kind of in this site now. And we talked several times earlier about how we can make these spaces not only work for us stormwater-wise, but how they can be public amenities. And we really liked this space for that. It's centrally located. There's a lot going around it. There's the parking lot and the hitch lot that gives good accessibility. But as Beth talked about, we're talking about cutting down into the creek, or around it, not into the creek. So we have that lower terrace in that lighter yellow, and then we will continue to terrace up. So that will hold our banks in, and we will be able to use that top section as whether you want to use it as a gathering space or even an educational space, both for how Excelsior Creek or Excelsior Springs floods, but also how the water systems work. But with our site, we have kind of this alternate side, if you just turn around from where we're standing at that purple dot of the Albany Hotel and the hitch lot itself. We really want to honor the history of what's going on in our area, and this is an optimal place to do that. So by putting in something like A and C of seating and berming and then educational signage, we really can pull all of these features together into one usable space.
So Crystal Lakes is really the only opportunity we looked at on East Fork. I mean, it was staring us right in the face. It's an existing lake. Lakes are meant to hold back water. So we initially ran our model and just saw some modifications to the spillway, and the outlet will do wonders. You know, it holds back extra water. We're getting more storage without impacting any of the homes around there. But you know, through conversations and through our site visits, you know, we learned that there's a lot of sediment that has built up in Crystal Lakes over time, so much that you can see it from Google Earth. So perhaps just going in and lowering the spillway and lowering that normal pool and exposing more of that sediment isn't, you know, it's maybe not as an easy opportunity as we thought it was. But our initial thought on this, did you?
No, you go for it. Keep going.
Well,
we
we talked about the excitement of implementing all these water quality features, and but then we really decided to dig into the sediment issue, because we wanted to make sure we don't want to put an improvement project in only to have something look and worse and not really satisfy the needs of the people living on the lake. So we did our due diligence. I guess first of all, the engineering we came up with was lowering the outfall a foot, raising the spillway, creating a sediment forebay to trap the sediment, which is essentially what's happening naturally. But we went out and did a bathymetric survey, and we flew some LiDAR to get an idea of how much sediment we were actually dealing with. And so you can kind of see, this is a digital elevation model that resulted from that boat that we showed pictured, like what they captured using really high-tech stuff. But there's essentially the deepest part of the lake has about 12 feet of water, and it's my understanding that this lake should be at least 20 or so feet deep at that point. So there's quite a bit of sediment built up. So that then became our focus here, was like, what kind of sediment are we dealing with? So we looked at a couple scenarios. One in which, okay, how much would we have to remove from this lake to get it back to day one of Crystal Lakes? And that number came out to be roughly 2 million cubic yards, which I don't know if you have a hard time picturing what a cubic yard is. So I think this is credited to Becca. She went ahead and showed us how much 270 cubic yards is. It's approximately a boxcar. So we thought we'd look at this in trains traveling down the track. So 2 million cubic yards will get you about 84 miles of train. And then we're showing this 400,000 cubic yards here too, because that is the minimum amount of sediment we would have to remove to counter that reduction in the lake of a foot, just to, keep things as existing or better. So, another visualization for you. How far is 84 miles? From the Elms to Sedalia, the fairgrounds specifically. And then the 400,000 cubic yards is still 16.8 miles of boxcars.
Then you're only going to Richmond,
Yeah. So we thought that was an interesting little side exercise, and kind of taught us a lot about Crystal Lakes. But then I guess here comes the rest of our engineering analysis. We have some actual numbers for all these projects that we were looking at, and we're talking about them in terms of reduction in flood depth. So we looked at a couple things to kind of like explain this slide. So 3 of our project areas were on Dry Fork, 1 was on East Fork Fishing River, and 1 on East Fork Fishing River is full of sediment. So we wanted to look at the results of just the Dry Fork projects, which is what this figure is showing. And these depth reductions are from one of our modeled scenarios, which was a 10% chance event, often kind of commonly referred to as a 10-year storm, which is roughly about 4 inches of rainfall over a 6-hour time period. We used this one because we were really seeing the best results with our 10-year event. Once we got to larger flood events, those reductions, kind of slowed down a little bit. But and also to put the 10-year storm into perspective, most design criteria, residential streets are designed to stay dry during a 10-year event. So I thought it was a pretty good design storm to work with. But anyway, this is improvements 1, 2, and 3. Those are all on Dry Fork. And so these are some locations that we used to kind of gauge what we were seeing. So we saw really significant reductions in depth on North Main. You'll remember we did raise the road and upsize that culvert. So it really makes a lot of sense that we'd be seeing a really good localized result from that project. And then we start moving downstream to see how that detention's working out and how that really significant overbank grading on South Street, how that's all working out. So we saw, up to 2 feet reduction on Kennedy, and then we started to get down to a foot of reduction of depth. And then what's really neat, we didn't even do anything on East Fork, but we were seeing some reductions at the Hall of Waters. It is behind a sort of a flood wall, a levee. And this required a lot of brain power over at GBA to figure out why this was happening. And all engineers and hydrology would say, well, it's due to timing, and it really is. We changed the peak on Dry Fork enough that it altered the hydraulics behind this levee. It was really cool to figure that out. That was a good day, yeah. Anyway, here's some results looking at all 4 projects combined from our modeling, same design storm. But we added South Marietta into this results table because we were just really tickled to see that we reduced all that flooding off of South Marietta over at the bridge, and saw some really good reductions along East Fork Fishing River. So the future, is bright. We move forward with, help Crystal Lakes kind of make those steps towards, getting to that. We could see some good reductions on East Fork as well. Oh, and then just for fun, we we got some rainfall data from the June 2021 event. That was a big one. We looked at that rainfall data. We couldn't design to this event because it rained in Excelsior Springs one day, and then before it dried off in Excelsior Springs, it rained up in the Watershed. So things got a little wonky in the model, but it was neat to see. So we just ran it through with all these solutions to see what you might see on a big, memorable event like that. The reductions weren't that large, but they were there. So, like we said, we're really looking at these more frequent events. Hopefully we don't see a June 2021 anytime in the near future, but, raising that road at North Main does some good work there. And like I said, we're seeing some results through the watershed. Lori.
Thank you, Beth, Becca, and Julie. So you've gotten to see all of the projects that we talked about, focusing on the 4 primary areas. We talked earlier just briefly about the fact small solutions to large solutions, short-term to long-term. You will see all of these projects on the boards over here. As you can kind of see from what we were talking about, our short term, we have the Dry Fork Greenway and the Main Street improvements, so that's right off the bat. That's funded. That will happen. The design will happen this year. Hopefully it'll even go into construction this year. Going on to the other project sites, we'll have to figure out where are we going to get the funding to be able to make those happen. That's where I was talking earlier about partners, whether it's partners that can actually help to make some of these things happen or partners that can provide funding. We need other resources to help the city to actually make these projects a reality, just like the Dry Fork Greenway and the Main Street improvements. Whether we can get additional ARPA funding, don't know, but we'll continue to look and the city will continue to look. And I will say Molly's always been awesome about finding grants and other things to help make things happen. So you have great resources within your city administration. So I would say if there's a chance of this happening, you guys have a great chance of these kinds of things happening. We are going to, as far as next step, we're finalizing the document, and part of that includes what we're hearing from you tonight. We intend to finish the document by the end of this month and get it to the city for them to be able to review, and we'll address any comments once they've had a chance to look at it. We are continuing to post our information on the website. Everything that's here tonight will be available to the city so that it can be posted on the website. So you can share it with friends and neighbors that maybe weren't able to be here tonight, or as you have questions about stuff, you'll be able to take a look back at that information. We have a lot of neat ideas. I think there's a lot of things that can really help. As we knew from the get-go, we couldn't eliminate your flooding, but we can help. So we have lots of good ideas. We hope that you will share your thoughts and any concerns that you have with us tonight. This will now open up into an open house where we want to be able to ask you some questions. These are all on the boards. These are also on the comment sheets. We want you to tell us what excites you about what you've been hearing tonight. Hopefully lots of this excites you. What are you worried about? Is there anything here that concerns you that maybe we haven't addressed? And then any other comments that you may have that you want us to be aware of. So please feel free to share that information with us. Before I give it back to Molly, I do want to ask that if you came in kind of as we were getting started, or even ahead of time, if you haven't signed in, please sign in. We want to know that you were here. The museum also wants to know that you were here. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Molly, and then we're going to open up to a open house.
I just wanted to add that Lori didn't allude to the fact that the conversations that we're having with Crystal Lakes, we're also talking about what needs to happen north of Crystal Lakes that's contributing to the sediment ending up in the lake. So that's also part of our conversations that have begun. And then the last thing is to thank Jason Cole for live streaming tonight, and it's very much appreciated.
And can be seen later on the Excelsior Citizen YouTube channel. So if you don't want to just look at the data that's available, you can go to the Excelsior Citizen YouTube channel and rewatch this, or send other people to it to watch it as well. And that's incredibly helpful.
Thank you so much. We're going to open up the open house, and we are here until 8 o'clock. So please feel free to stay as long as you like and have conversations with each and every one of us. Thank you so much.